So we have Mike Gonzalez on. He is the author of BLM, The Making of a New Marxist Revolution. He is also a senior fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Mike, welcome to the program. Glad you're here.
Thanks a lot, Glenn. It's great to be on with you.
Thank you. So we've been talking internally here for the last couple of weeks on what Soros is doing with Hispanic radio stations, and I think this is really, really important, and I'll explain why in a second, but I'd like to hear your telling of what's happening and what the influence is.
Well, it's really very subversive. He's financing the purchase of 18 Spanish-language radio stations across the country. That is a third of the audience that we call Hispanic. Is very varied, but it's even greater. It's an even greater percentage of those who listen to Spanish. Many Mexican Americans and Cuban Americans just transact in English, so it's probably like 50% of Spanish speakers who turn to Spanish radio. Spanish language radio is very important, and they're panicking. They're panicking because of the humongous inroads that conservatives are making with, for example, Mexican Americans in the Rio Grande Valley. You know that story very well. Texas 34th is a prime example of that. With Cuban Americans in Miami, but not just Cuban Americans, Colombian Americans and Venezuelan Americans. So this is really purely a play for the ideological suppression of free speech. The two women at the head of this media group have zero experience in broadcasting or any type of journalism, Glenn. They were picked to own the venture just because they're hard left activists, and Soros' involvement in this makes that crystal clear. Soros, as you know, finances many very hard left causes around the globe, including the election of rogue prosecutors who refuse to prosecute criminals. One of the reasons our cities are so crime infested is because he's had all these prosecutors elected. Now he is financing the purchase of 18 Spanish language stations to suppress the transmission of conservative views. It is that simple.
Okay, so are these music stations? Are these talk stations? Are they all?
They vary. Some of them are sports. Some of them are music. They're going to change, obviously, to left talk radio, which never, by the way, it always fails, as you know. For some reason, leftist talk radio is never a success. Two stations in Miami, Radio Mambi and the QBA, are talk stations. It's conservative radio stations that cater to the Cuban American community. This adds a double insult because one of the women who owned this new media group, the media group, by the way, is called the Latino Media Network, LMN, owned now by two women. One is Stephanie Valencia. The other one is Jess Morales Roqueto. Roqueto is a longtime associate of Black Lives Matter. You mentioned my book, BLM. In the process of writing that book, I discovered that many people use their platforms to get their followers, their social media followers, to do BLM's bidding. Well, Roqueto is one of those. In the 2014 Ferguson riots, in the 2020 riots, she urged her followers on social media to take their orders from BLM. She's a long-term associate of Alicia Garza, who is one of the co-founders of BLM, who's a fanatical Marxist. And this is what I'm coming to. It is really insulting that these two Miami radio stations that are now transmitting conservative views are going to be owned by Roqueto, who is an associate of BLM, because BLM is a strong supporter of Cuba's communist government, under which Cuban Americans have suffered. So this is one of the many ironies involved here.
So with the new influx, though, of Hispanics from all over, this is the kind of stuff that they're probably used to hearing in their own country. Because I would imagine that in many places in South America, you're not getting a conservative viewpoint because the governments are, many of them, failed or near failed. or narco states, I think Mexico is damn near a failed state. So they won't recognize, they may tune into this and they'll think our politics are just the same as where they came from?
Well, you're 100% right with regards to the Cuban Americans and the Venezuelans and the Colombian Americans in South Florida. They have fled, in the case of the Venezuelans and the Cubans, they have fled communist regimes that have completely ruined their economies and the countries, and ended up in gulags and all that. In the case of the Rio Grande Valley, and this is very important, you have some people there that go back to the 1700s, whose roots go back to the 1700s. These are not really immigrants. They're founding families, and this is the heartland of Tejano culture. So you know the symbolism of this, and this is what keeps George Soros awake at night, and these women awake at night. It's the idea that the RGV, and it's really in the RGV in the Rio Grande Valley that you've seen the most rapid movement towards conservative. Those votes, those counties shifted like 30, 40 points between 16 and 20 in 2020 in support for Trump. Trump even won one of them. The district, the Texas 34th, just won by Mayra Flores, is south of San Antonio. So in the Rio Grande Valley, and I think, and it's no coincidence that 5 of these stations are in Texas, and 3 of them are in the RGV.
Boy, they are working overtime in Texas to destroy what Texas has always been. When does this start? When do this network go on?
Well, it hasn't bought them yet. The FCC has to approve, and there's a lot of talk about Marco Rubio and many some representatives like Carlos Jimenez have written to the FCC saying before you allow this, you should take a look at this, of what is going to be done. I'll tell you the origin of this, Glenn. Salem Radio was going to buy these stations. And then Soros found out about it, and the left found out about it, and complained to the Hispanic caucus in Congress in Washington. And then Salem apparently ran out of time. They couldn't put together the money. Salem had bid $42 million. And then Soros came in, because Soros is not in for the money. He's in for the ideology. And he bid $60 million for the same station that Salem was going to buy for $42 million. So they're going to be, this is really the origin of that.
So I know a lot of people that are Hispanic talk broadcasters. They are eager to speak Spanish on air. Some of them are doing English shows. Lots of podcasters. We just had a new Spanish-speaking network move into the Mercury studio compound. But what do we do? I mean, the problem is that so many people, like me, I can't get into the Spanish-speaking networks because I can't speak the language. So I would not be good at running it because they could be saying, oh, yeah, man, Soros is the best, and I would have no idea. But I've talked to people on the right, and they just will not part with their money. I'm talking about the big money bags. They will not part with their money unless you see instant results. And this is a long-term indoctrination from the left. So what do we do?
Well, Salem was willing to do it. Salem was for $42 million. You're completely right. What do we do? First, we have to expose this. We have to expose, the LMN is saying, no, this is about keeping these radio stations in Latino hands. No, first of all, that's BS. That's not really what it's about. It's about leftist indoctrination and suppressing conservative views. And number 2, nobody in Miami or the RGV care about the last name of the people who own the stations. What they care about is viewpoint diversity. This is just a facade. This is the real disinformation, by the way. So we exposed this. We exposed the ties to Alicia Garza by Jess Morales Roqueto, which is not getting out. We need to say, look, she's been an associate of Alicia Garza for over a decade. She leads several organizations with Alicia Garza. Alicia Garza is a supporter of Cuba's communist government, which puts people in prison, there's a reason why Cubans have had to flee is because of this government. Roqueto is an ally, a long-term ally and associate of this woman. And I tell you, in doing my research, the research for my book on BLM, as I said, I discovered that they rely on a vast network of supporters. The reason why they got out so quickly is because in Roqueto, this woman who's now going to own these stations, is one of the people who support BLM and tells her followers, look, turn out for the marches. So I think exposure is a big thing. Other than that is, I think convincing deep-pocketed conservatives that if you don't do this, George Soros
get in the game.
Do it. And your children and grandchildren are not going to live in the country you like.
Mike Gonzalez, he is the author of BLM, The Making of a New Marxist Revolution. The Hispanic audience, we're always told that they would fall more directly in line with conservative thought, and I buy that. Same with African Americans. When you talk to them, not about politics, but about their values, they're right in line. However, they've been convinced that the Republicans are whatever. How open do you think Hispanic audiences would be to the conservative talk?
I tell you, my own take on this is that the huge movement that we have seen towards conservatism has nothing to do with conservatives. I mean, I'm sorry to say that. It's the left. The left has gone so nuts in calling a boy a girl and saying that everything is about race that these voters are looking around saying, no, we don't want any part of this. This is crazy talk. And there are different reasons, right? The reason why people in the RGV who will be of Mexican background, although as I've said, many of them have a multi-generational roots in this country, they really feel the culture. Texas, as you well know, is a fusion of Mexican culture and Scots-Irish culture and German culture. People who fused and made Texas into the wonderful state and culture that it is. They have a lot at stake if the culture is eroded, if the culture is taken away or altered or transformed. And I think also the border issues really affect the Tejanos in the RGV. As you know, the vast majority of the border guards are of Mexican origin, whether they've been here a generation or 17 generation. The issue for the Cubans and the Venezuelans, yes.
No, go ahead and finish your sentence. I'm sorry.
The issue with the Venezuelans and the Cubans in Miami are different. They suffered trauma from seeing what socialism did to their country. Now, if you read reporting on this, everybody says, well, they were spreading disinformation, these stations. They were calling Biden a socialista. First of all, nobody knows. Biden himself doesn't know what he is. But he's implementing, the action plans, the equity action plans the White House issued in April that were very sweeping. BLM, the main BLM group, said they wrote it with him. They co-wrote these BLM, these equity action plans. So they're implementing policy, and these were really extensive, 25 action plans, co-written by fanatical Marxists. So if you're not able to say this in Spanish and explain it in Spanish, that is suppressing actual facts.
So, Mike, I thank you so much for all the work that you've done on BLM and also following this. I'd love to have you back. BLM, The Making of the New Marxist Revolution, talking about George Soros funding, buying up an entire, a very influential radio network aimed right directly at Hispanics.